It may be a wet, muggy July day, but for anybody in the northern hemisphere who grows their own food, or forages food, or collects food from the wild, basically is bound by the seasons. We all know that all too soon winter is coming. So right now I'm kind of in the calm between the storm, or the calm before the storm, or the calm after the storm, or maybe all three. Basically today, fortunately, we had a really good rainstorm. It has absolutely thoroughly soaked everything. I don't have an exact measurement, but the amount of rain we got was astronomical considering we've had about 2 weeks of dry weather. So, needless to say, the garden got a really, really good dousing of water, which was basically badly needed. Even though it's a hot, muggy, and I sound like I'm complaining, but it's a hot, muggy July day. It's timely that it rained because all too quickly we are going to get to the point of harvesting, etc. But right now this is a good time to sort of reflect on that bigger picture, calm before the storm, of seasonality of northern homestead life. So as you can see here, we got a lot of rain. This was kind of about that rung, maybe a little higher than that, and our water collection off the roof has worked amazing. Now, one thing about this, as I go over and we look at the goldfish, this is a good example of, because of where we live, and we're not even severely northern Canada or northern hemisphere, we're still very, very fortunate, but we're very much affected by sort of the impending doom of that really most inhospitable season from a growing perspective of winter, because everything we have either has to be short season or, like these goldfish, extremely tough and extremely hardy, and able to withstand kind of any weather condition that's thrown at it. And although this is not a typical homestead topic, goldfish, it really does emphasize the the need for resiliency. Of course, when I pan around the garden, we have things that are very cold hardy, like the red Russian kale and dwarf Scotch kale, which are pretty much filling these beds. And we have other things that are kind of in a race against time, such as the Kajari melons over here, which actually are doing really well this year. But needless to say, those plants are basically bound by the super short season that we have to produce fruit, or, well, ultimately they're going to die anyways, but they are in that race. Likewise, things like sweet potatoes. Now, I suppose a lesson here is, for certain things, we may not have given these the best chance, although they're looking really good right now. I'm very curious to see if we've actually given adequate time for these, which is an error on our part, which frankly is a part of living in an area where you experience very distinct dramatic seasons, that if things aren't timed properly, even if you have luscious green growth on top, they may never come to fruition of actually providing you sort of the meaningful food item that you were hoping for. So it feels like in a lot of ways we've just finished planting, and realistically we have just finished planting, and we're already, as I say, rounding that bend. These Amish snap peas behind us are a great example. Perfectly timed the way they're supposed to be, but they're on their way out, going to a seed crop, and which is one of the benefits of a species or type of vegetable like this that's relatively short season, is they're actually fairly well adapted for sort of more northerly latitudes. And of course the tomatoes. I think tomatoes have to be a really good marker of sort of the shift, because as they get closer and closer to production, you know, fall is coming, and then you basically end up in that race against time to make sure that they finish up their production, or the production that we need out of them, before the fall cool down and frost hits them. And obviously they don't persist in the garden even close to the winter months, but their existence in the garden is a fairly short one. So this is probably sounding kind of melodramatic, bit of a downer, I don't know, just a bit of an odd video, but I think getting to the point now, the point is, for the vast majority of us, in modern context, we're very used to being able to have whatever we want at our fingertips whenever we want it. That's sort of the epitome of modern convenience. But the reality of it is, for thousands and thousands of people that came before us, this seasonality, seasonal impact, and sort of that forthcoming impending doom of, winter's coming and you need to do a lot of things before it does, because once it comes outside of the modern context, you pretty much, that was it, and you needed things to see you through that period, or you ran the risk of not making it yourself, much like a lot of the wild animals that live around us. So again, that point is taking a moment in between the calm and the storm to in this case, mostly look at the garden, although this still applies to animals too. But I think the garden emphasizes it most, because gardening is without a doubt the most economical, i.e. the biggest bang for your buck, but it's also the largest amount of work, because unfortunately, absolutely everything has to happen relatively perfectly timed, or you may not get the produce you need to see yourself through the winter. There's also a bit of a reminder. We're very fortunate this year because we have a lot of crops, such as, again, this red Russian kale, which is just going crazy, that have done really, really well for us. And again, looking at sort of old-timey versus modern convenience, realistically, when you start to go down the line of self-sufficiency and growing enough to really feed yourself, you have to sort of go back in time and rethink some things a bit. Because it's not always about what we want. And this is going to sound really, really, I guess, kind of negative in a way. It's not necessarily about what we want, but it's about what we need in a lot of cases. And I think our experience with the turnips, or pulling the turnips out recently, is a great one, because a lot of people would look at turnips and turn their nose up at them, pardon the pun. A lot of people don't have good experiences with turnips. They're not a real favorite crop, and I'm not advocating that everybody stops growing other vegetables to grow turnips. I'm just saying that some of the staples of time gone by, and to use the banana example, bananas would not have been a staple food for us. It would have been an extreme luxury. And we're very fortunate to be able to get things like that, tropical fruits, and I'm going to say it this way, global trade and things that we would never be able to get otherwise, but coming to expect those things and not appreciate or value or undervalue the things that are adapted / have evolved alongside us, have been selected alongside us, however you want to look at that, to help us support ourselves in it doesn't have to be northern hemisphere. It can be any environment. It could be really dry. It could be really wet. It could be really cold. It could be really hot. There are things that are perfectly adapted for every environment, and most of us humans don't live in the ideal space, because there are sweet spots in the world where you can grow everything and you can grow everything year round. But for the vast majority of us, we have to think in a yearly cycle of, at minimum, wet and dry, and at maximum, spring, summer, fall, winter. Of course, it isn't just gardens, it's livestock as well. You'll probably notice the background ambience of our videos sort of changes through the seasons, because you're basically getting whatever noises are in the background at the time we film. And of course, at certain times of the year, it's filled with the sounds of birds, nesting birds, singing birds, and when you get to July, even though there are some species that are still finishing up, and there's some species, like our domestic geese and chickens, that, they take a little longer than songbirds, but as you can see, they are well on their way to growing out to their full size here. But you'll notice a lot of the ambience is switching to more of an insect drone as we get to what's typically the hottest, driest, even though today it's wettest, but the hottest, driest part of the year before we get into late summer and fall. Thinking seasonally when it comes to livestock, I think is potentially harder for a lot of folks than it is for plants. And I'm going to use sort of the age-old example I often use, but we've sort of been trained in modern homesteading to look for the fastest, quickest return, and simplest return, and in a lot of cases we've been sold the put and take models. And I'm going to say it, when you live in a northern environment, those are really appealing, because in the case of a broiler chicken, if you only have to have it for 13 weeks, it means you don't have to have it over the winter. Now, of course, on the flip side, you lose all your self-sufficiency in doing that. You've grown your own food, but you're completely dependent on others, which, of course, we all know how that is going for a lot of us in the world right now, and how we might see things turn in the latter part of this year, pending on world events. But when it comes to livestock, thinking seasonal is a little different, because you're looking at it in the yearly cycle, or in some cases more than a yearly cycle, of whatever livestock you're keeping. I.e., in the case of chickens, you can breed chickens at any time of the year, out of season, etc. But it is easiest, and I'm going to say this from experience, to look at your yearly cycle the same as you would for your wild birds. I.e., winter is not breeding season. Spring is when breeding season starts. Chicks grow out through the summer months, finish in the fall, and you basically harvest in the fall, early, late fall, depending on the breed and whatnot. Patient that you're going to downsize the number of animals you have for the winter, which is going to be your biggest limiting factor of space and resources, i.e. food. So as we watch these partridge chanticleer chicks in what looks like a grassland savanna, which is actually the area behind our barn, this is all food for thought. Things to think about, because, as I say, if you live in the northern hemisphere, despite the fact that right now it kind of is a time of plenty, it's the nice time of year, winter's still coming, and just like the story of the ant and the grasshopper, you really have to have that long-term mindset of looking at things in a yearly cycle, or potentially greater than a yearly cycle, if you really want to break some of your dependency on others. And I don't mean that in terms of local community, but I mean that in the bigger promise of modern convenience. Because if you don't look at it in that way, you're likely to fail, and at very minimum, you're likely to be disappointed, because, as I say, we've all been sold the convenience, the easiness of that modern convenience of I can have anything I want whenever I want it. But it's a complete lie, in that somebody somewhere still has to work within the bounds of natural cycles and selection for the vast majority of things we eat, or take control of every single variable, which requires a large amount of resources and energy to be able to produce things in environments that they otherwise would not be able to produce things during a specific time of year. So what are your thoughts to this sort of calm before the storm, both figuratively and metaphorically, i.e., we're in the calm between the storm today, which you probably don't have much of a thought on, because it's a great thing to have had the storm, because that's helping us grow food, both pasture and vegetables. But potentially more figuratively, of the potential impending doom that may be on our way, and how we may have to really start thinking fast, in a little bit more in line with the natural cycles around us, even if we are raising and growing our own food, because at the end of the day, and basically, you're still going to be bound by the natural cycles that you're going to be exposed to where you live. So hopefully you enjoyed this video, and be very curious to hear other people's thoughts on the matter, because I think this is an entry video to a much, much, much larger discussion that you could really get into the nitty-gritty of a great many things.